A little bit of digression here, but it is a conceptual digression that most people shouldn't know. What is this server and client and all of this, by the way? Your server component can have a client component which can have a server component. The problem happens is that if you import your server component in a client component, right, then the boundary is now of the use client, and therefore that imported server component by default becomes a client component. Just to make it clear, I will show you it like this. For instance, inside this app, let's have a parent, server parent. Okay, let's call it as page.tsx, and let's say server parent like this. Okay, let's console this as server parent. Okay, export default. Let's copy this whole thing. Let's have within that, we will have server component tsx. Let's call this as server component and make this as like this. Let's copy this. We will have some sort of like a client component. We will have this as client component. Now let's have another server component, not this as a page, but as file server component 2.tsx. And let's copy paste this whole thing here. We will say it as 2, 2, 2, and 2. All right, so this is our page. So let's have like this. We will have server component. Okay, now in each of these server and all of that component, I will have children, and that children will be that of React node. For now, we will just do it like this. So let's copy this whole thing, save, paste, React node. We will copy this, go here, save. All right, we will make sure that this also is like, this is server component. We have the children. Let's call it children like this. I should have done that from the beginning. Let's call it this because I'm already doing the console logging here. And in the client component itself, I will have the same goes here, and the same goes here. So we have server component. Within that, we have say client component like this. And within that, we have another server component too. All right. Now this can be like, let's call it like this. In all of them, I want it to just be optional as well. All right, so we have a server component. Within that, we have a client component. Within that, we have a server component number 2. For the client component to be client component, we have to use something called the directive of use client. Let's go and see what it actually prints. If we go to server parent / server parent, we will change this to this. We will go back to our console and we will press enter. You see what happened? That the client component got printed here. There's no server component that got printed here at all. In our end, I mean in the server parent got printed, which is a server component got printed, server component 2 got printed, and then the client component also got printed, which is fine. This is what we thought it will be, even though this server component is a part and parcel or a children of this client component, right? So this is the understanding that is different from here, that you can have a server component which can have a child component which can wrap around the server component. I mean the child component, client component can have this as like server component as well. So when does this become a client component? Well, let's see that. So rather than doing this, what will happen if I do it like this, but then in this client component itself, right, I, apart from doing that like this, I import server component 2. So look what I did. I said there's a server component, right, which includes a client component, right? Then that means this client component is basically under the server component number 1. But then this client component has called the server component, right? That means it is the same thing. I am doing the same thing, nothing else, right? You may think that is the case, right? Between this and simply making sure that I am calling this inside the client component rather than wrapping the client component around it, I'm calling that here. So you may think it's the same thing, but now let's check what happens. Oh, look. Now the server component console is printing right here. That means server component 2 became the client component. You see the problem here, right? So this understanding that we cannot wrap the server component inside the client component is false, because we did exactly that. This is the wrapping of server component inside the client component. So this pattern, we cannot remove that pattern. Why? Because all the providers that are available in the React ecosystem, like Auth0 provider or the theme providers or whatever the provider that you actually use, like context and all of that, they will remain on the client end, right? Now, if it is the case that the moment you wrap your server component around the client component, it becomes a client component, then the entire thing is done and wasted, right? So that is not the case. So this is like a different thing, right? Notice what is happening here. This component is under the boundary. Basically all these things, the server component, the client component number 2, they're all being imported in the server boundary. This is a use server boundary. This is a server component in which we are importing a bunch of other components, whether it is another server component or it is another client component. We don't care. As long as the boundary is a server boundary, which is this page represents a server component. Therefore, the entire boundary that it is encapsulating is a server boundary. Everything is fine, right? What happens here in this, what happens here when I say this, is that I have defined the boundary as a client boundary. Now, anytime I import any component here inside this use client boundary, inside this client boundary will become a client component. I hope that is clear. Anytime we import anything inside the client boundary, which is defined by use client, that component becomes a client component. Right? This does not apply to the server actions difference. This applies to the server components or any sort of like a component. Okay. So how can we overcome this? And we did exactly that here, right? What you can do is simply not import this. Just don't import it. And then what you can do is that you can pass it as, say, a prop. If you want to use this, you can pass it as a prop, or to be precise, as a child. We can just say, okay, I will use this structure, which is going to be the client component. I will do things here, but then this child will be the server component that I want to use. So I will go one step up and I will make that server component as a child. And this pattern works pretty well. Why? Because this is a server boundary. This page is a server boundary. It imports a bunch of things. Doesn't matter. Everything is server oriented. Then it goes inside this imported one, server component. Everything is a server boundary. So the children will remain in the server boundary. It's good. Then it goes inside this client component. Now this is a use client boundary or the client boundary. Here it sees there's no such sort of like an import anything. And this is treated as just a node passing, which we don't care about, right? It can be anything. So it makes sure that it does not touch this children at all, right? This is a very superficial overview here, but basically this children does not become the client component because inside this client boundary, there is no import of any other server component. Then it goes inside this child and it comes to this and it says, okay, this is again back to the server boundary because there is no use client directive at the top. So now it is again the server component. So this is the mental model that you have to understand in concept, and I hope that it's clear as well.